She was a God-fearing young woman with a rising career in law enforcement.
She loved to help people.
She was a ray of light.
And he was the man who'd join her in holy matrimony.
The two quickly became inseparable.
She opened her heart. She fell in love.
But hearts are broken when gunshots ring out in the night.
He tried his best to protect her.
I literally felt my world turn upside down. I lost my whole soul.
What initially seems like an open and shut case is anything but.
They now have a double homicide. He owed a kingpin a lot of money.
And when dark secrets come to the surface, they'll send the case spiraling out of control.
She didn't know that he was married.
The woman was pregnant.
I was totally shocked.
He was gonna lose everything.
Take this.
Ain't no way you could tell me you loved her and turn around and do that. No, that was hate.
October 27th, 2021. It's a chilly fall day in Covington, Georgia, a small city about 40 miles east of Atlanta.
Covington is a very nice suburban area and a great place to raise a family.
If you talk to anyone from Covington, they refer to themselves as the Hollywood of the South because numerous shows and blockbuster movies have been shot in the city of Covington.
But as night falls on this charming southern community, a horror story begins to play out in real life.
Around 10:30 p.m. that night, Tyrone McPherson was driving to his cousin's house to hang out.
As Tyrone makes his way to the neighborhood where his cousin, 35-year-old Jaquavia Bo Jackson lives, he receives a call from him.
Bo was frantic.
Whoa, calm down, man. What happened?
Bo told him his wife had just been shot.
Bo was too frantic to give too much information, aside from the fact that there was two assailants.
All right, listen, I just pulled up. Just stay with it. I'm gonna call the cops.
Tyrone hangs up with his cousin and calls police.
Newton County 911.
Hello, yes, there's been a shooting. I need some help. Send some help, quick.
Newton County investigators race to the home.
They know time is of the essence in a situation like this.
When the police arrived, Tyrone was outside with his cousin.
Come on!
Bo kept repeating, I knew this was gonna happen. They just came into the house and they started shooting.
Bo is hysterical, holding a gun in his hand.
Sir, drop the weapon, please.
She's inside. I did everything I could.
He begins to sob and says that his wife has been shot and he tried his best to protect her.
Police slowly make their way inside the home with guns drawn.
They have no earthly idea whether Bo's wife is dead or alive, or even if the shooters are still on the scene.
Investigators don't find any sign of the shooters, but they do find Bo's wife, 28-year-old Shakima Brown Jackson.
She appeared to have been shot several times.
An officer checks for any sign of life but does not find a pulse. Shakima is gone.
Shakima Brown Jackson was a warm-hearted young woman dedicated to living out her faith.
She was the most special thing in life I could ever hold and endure.
My little cousin, she was a ray of light. She lit up any room that she walked into. She's funny, too smart for her own good.
Shakima was a great, bubbly person, very jokeful, loved the Lord.
Shakima was very active in her church, and she loved volunteering.
Right away, I could see that she was really serious about learning about God. She came to me and said, yeah, I would like to teach. And so I told her to prepare some lessons and see how you do.
Let's start with the prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, I just thank you for this day, Lord. I thank you, God, for this Bible study that we're having on tonight, Lord. I just thank you.
Shakima never, ever, ever missed Bible study.
He surrendered up his life so that we may have eternal life.
Shakima would always encourage me and just be like, see where God leads you.
For Shakima, she believed God was leading her to a career in law enforcement.
She loved to help people, and the job that she was getting into, she felt like that she could be a part of something bigger than herself.
On the job, she met the man who would eventually become her husband, Jaquavia Bo Jackson.
She was working as a security guard in a manufacturing company.
She would let people in, let them out.
Bo was a successful truck driver.
Well, seeing you always makes my day.
Thank you. The attraction was there, and Bo didn't waste any time.
Mind if I take you out this weekend?
I'd like that.
He became this wonderful man to her because she opened her heart. She fell in love.
She was just excited to, have somebody that was quiet and didn't seem like they was out there doing everything under the sun.
In February of 2020, the couple promised themselves to one another in holy matrimony. And that fall, Shakima gave birth to their son.
She did everything for this kid. She was an immaculate mom. Everything, this was her world.
Boy, her world lit up. He was her ray of sunshine. Literally. He got this infectious smile from Shakima.
After the birth of her son, Shakima was more driven than ever.
She was very interested in becoming a deputy.
She was determined to do everything. With a baby, with a husband. I'm determined. I'm gonna be a deputy sheriff.
Shakima's determination paid off.
She worked hard at it. She studied it. She was in mandate for months and months. And I remember the day she called me on the floor screaming and hollering, "Mommy, I did it, I did it." I said, "Yes, baby, I knew you could, I told you."
Bo and the rest of her family were so proud of Shakima.
But only a month after her promotion, Shakima's fellow deputies have found her inside her home, covered in blood.
We did discover Shakima Jackson, deceased on the couch, appeared to have been shot several times.
However, police soon learned that Shakima isn't the only victim of this deadly shooting.
On the other side of the room is the body of a man lying face down.
He's been shot one time in the back of the head.
They now have a double homicide on their hands.
With her husband, Jaquavia Bo Jackson by her side, 28-year-old Shakima Brown Jackson was ready to take on the world.
She was just so excited to be a deputy sheriff. She had just graduated the mandate process, and she was certified.
Shakima had a great reputation. She was a hard worker. She was a Fulton County deputy. Everybody had nothing but positive things to say about her.
However, just 1 month after her promotion, Shakima has fallen victim to a horrific shooting.
Shakima had been shot 7 times. Once in the shoulder, 3 times in the chest, and another 3 times in the face.
To detectives, it seems like overkill.
That's a lot of time to shoot someone. There was a lot of rage behind these shots.
And Shakima isn't the only victim.
On the other side of the room is the body of a man lying face down on the floor.
He was shot in the back of his head through his hoodie.
But who is he?
His driver's license identified him as Lavoy Brown, Shakima's older brother.
30-year-old Lavoy Brown wasn't just Shakima's big brother. He was her best friend.
They just always stuck together. They never even had fights.
You couldn't say Lavoy without Shakima and Shakima without Lavoy. He was an active member in our church also. He loved God.
Everybody in the church, when they first came, thought they were twins because of how close they were. They interacted so well together. I'm saying these 2 young folks are really, really humble and loving towards one another.
Lavoy was her full protector. He protected his sister from head to toe. You hear me? He was her, ride or die. They did everything.
So how did this beloved brother and sister end up shot to death, just mere feet from each other?
There were no shell casings in the living room at all. At that moment, I thought somebody just picked them up to cover their tracks.
But investigators do find a spent .45 caliber projectile.
It's covered in sheetrock and fiber. It's as if it had gone through the leg of the couch.
It appears as if the bullet was shot at a low angle at the end of the hallway out toward the living room.
Going down the hallway, there was pieces of sheetrock that were on the floor. At that time, we just knew that we had 2 people dead and we only had one person there that was possibly a witness, and that was Jaquavia.
He has been taken to the station and is awaiting to give a formal statement.
But before detectives can head back to the station to interview Shakima's husband, her panicked mother arrives on the scene.
I pulls up. I see the yellow tape. I'm like, God, yellow tape. You know, I'm from New York. When you see yellow tape, that's death.
We can't let you inside.
What is going on?
Can't
Where
let you
are
inside.
my babies? Where are my babies?
I'm screaming out, she's a deputy. She's one of y'all. Ah, where my kids? Lavoy, screaming, hollering.
Are they gone?
Yes, I'm so sorry.
He said 2 people came in there and killed them. I dropped to my knees. Them officers, all they could do is shake their head.
Losing a son and a daughter in the same night. It was such a tragedy.
When I see my kids come out in the body bag, it's like I lost my whole soul. I lost myself. I lost myself.
When the news spreads to the rest of Shakima and Lavoy's loved ones, they're equally devastated.
I can't even explain the hurt. It's like being in a storm and the wind blowing everybody everywhere. There was a lot of pain, a lot of questions, me praying to God, asking why.
I literally felt my world turn upside down. Literally. Like it was night and day. I'm calling, I'm trying to call whoever to find out what's going on. I'm even calling Lavoy and Shakima phone because I'm like, okay, I can't believe it.
40 miles away, at Fulton County Sheriff's Headquarters, Shakima's co-workers are also struggling to come to terms with the tragic news.
Once I found out what was going on, it was just unreal. I was just heartbroken because of the relationship that we had built and what she meant to the sheriff's office and the people that she worked with. And she didn't deserve that at all.
Back at the Covington Police Station, homicide detectives sit down with Jaquavia Bo Jackson.
He still appeared to be pretty distraught.
Bo, tell us what happened tonight.
Bo says earlier that evening, Shakima informed him that her brother would be coming over with a couple of his friends.
Lavoy knows 2 guys that would like to get in the trucking business and want to come by and talk trucking business with him.
I mean, it would really mean a lot to my brother.
I don't know. It's kind of short notice, and my cousin's already coming over tonight.
He don't feel comfortable about it because he don't know these people.
But Bo says Shakima was insistent.
Honey, it's not gonna take that long. Come on.
Okay, fine.
Around dinner time, Lavoy came over to wait for his friends. But as it got later in the night, Bo told him that it was too late for his friends to come over.
It's getting kind of late, boy.
Come on, man. Just meet with them. You might like what they have to say.
What do you mean?
You help these people out, it's $500 a day, man.
Bo tells detectives that's when he realized what Lavoy and his friends were really after. And it wasn't business advice.
These men that were coming over to the house were in the drug game.
Jaquavia starts then saying that Lavoy is trying to get him to run drugs, that he's only wanting him to get these trucks and stuff like that so he can run stuff up for him in the trucks and whatnot and try to help him out in an illegal business.
According to Bo, Lavoy said he owed a kingpin a lot of money, and this was the only way he can think to repay his debt.
Please, man, I owe these people so much money. Help me out on this, man.
You're gonna have to find another way. You better tell your friends it's off.
Bo said he declined to get involved.
But Bo explains that before he and Lavoy could continue their discussion, the men showed up at the house.
Must be them.
What's up? What's up?
Just my brother-in-law, Jaquavia, but you can call him Bo.
Bo claimed the men introduced themselves as Barry and City.
And Bo says Shakima welcomed them with open arms.
Can I get you two anything?
I'll take a water if you don't mind.
Sure.
Bo tells detectives he immediately got a bad feeling, so he excused himself to go grab his pistol from the bedroom.
Show him, sit down.
Excuse me for one moment. I'll be right back.
From the bedroom, Bo says he could hear the three men start talking business.
What do you have for us?
My brother-in-law, he's a truck driver. He can transport some of that stuff across the country.
Okay. I mean, we've been helping you out a lot.
He could hear them talking for a moment, and then the volume of their voices increased. It started to get heated. He said that he could hear them arguing with Lavoy.
Please, I need more time.
You out of time. We want the money now.
He hears yelling,
What's going on?
and then he hears gunshots.
Detectives investigating the double homicide of Shakima Brown Jackson and her brother Lavoy Brown are speaking with Shakima's husband, Jaquavia Bo Jackson.
Bo claimed that on the night of the murders, Lavoy invited some men over with the hopes of convincing him of transporting drugs on his truck.
And Bo says when he excused himself from the conversation, he could hear it get heated from the back bedroom.
He said that he could hear the men arguing with Lavoy.
Please, I need more time.
You out of time. We want the money now.
Then Bo says he heard Shakima enter.
What's going on?
He hears yelling, and then he hears gunshots.
Hold on.
In an attempt to scare the men off, Bo says he then cocked his gun.
He leans out the back bedroom door and fires one shot towards the living room area, towards the male.
The bullet scraped the side of the wall. Detectives note that this is probably the projectile that they found on the living room floor, covered in sheetrock.
By the time Bo made it back into the living room, the men were gone.
He sees Lavoy's dead. He sees Shakima's dead.
Yo, Tyrone!
In a state of shock, the first person he thought to call was his cousin Tyrone, who was already on his way over.
She bleeding bad.
Whoa, calm down, man. What happened?
Detectives asked Bo if he had any type of description about these men called Barry and City.
One was heavy set and short, one tall and skinny.
Detectives are skeptical of Bo's story.
It seems highly unlikely that Lavoy would be mixed up in the drug game.
Lavoy has no history of drug-related arrests. In fact, he has no criminal background at all, for that matter.
But one element of Bo's story does add up.
The gun Bo was holding at the crime scene wasn't a match for the bullets that killed Shakima and Lavoy.
Bo's gun was a .45 caliber pistol.
The bullets retrieved from the victims' bodies were consistent with a different type of weapon.
That firearm, based on what the forensics stated, it was a Colt revolver, .38 Special to .357 Magnum.
Could Bo be telling the truth? Hoping for more insight into his relationship with his wife, detectives bring in Shakima's mother, Zona Inman, the next morning to give an official statement.
She was still understandably heartbroken after what happened to her two children.
You got a mother coming out here who didn't lose one child. She lost two children all at one time from one act of violence.
Is it possible that Levoy or Shakima had ties to gangs or drug affiliates?
I'm sorry, what? We talking and he's saying a whole bunch of mess about all of this crazy nonsense.
It don't even sound right. That's hard to believe. What, two guys
That is ridiculous.
Like, they don't mix. Come on, Shakima and Lavoy. If anybody knows them, come on now.
If you knew them personally, you'll know you could never identify them with anything dealing with drugs.
Lavoy was a hard worker and a very good man. He would never get involved in the street life. And he would never do anything to put his sister's career or safety at risk.
Okay. I can understand that. But what can you tell us about Shakima's relationship with her husband? Any issues there?
Oh, yes.
She told me that Shakima and Jaquavia had been having marital problems, that Jaquavia had actually moved into another bedroom. They were having issues with money and stuff like that.
You talking when I'm talking. Stop talking when I'm talking. Stop talking when I'm talking.
So Shakima and Jaquavius were arguing every day. Their marriage started going down.
Zona explains that although Bo worked in trucking at the beginning of the marriage, by October of 2021, he had been laid off.
I can't afford to keep doing this.
I ain't trying to hear all that, man.
I don't know what happened, but he had to resign, so they claimed. They were having issues with the bills. It was always the bills. And he was lack of work. He couldn't help her pay nothing.
But it wasn't just money problems they were having.
Shakima had just found out that Bo had been unfaithful, and she discovered it in the worst way possible.
Letters start arriving to the house, ordering Bo to take a paternity test.
Not only had Bo cheated on her, but the woman was pregnant.
Detectives investigating the murder of Shakima Brown Jackson and Lavoy Brown are speaking with the siblings' mother, Zona Inman. And they've just learned that Shakima's husband, Bo, had been hiding a horrible secret from her.
Not only had Bo cheated on Shakima, but he had gotten another woman pregnant.
She on the child support for the kid, and they sent the letter.
Shakima confronted Bo about the letters.
Bo, what is this?
Wow, this is ridiculous.
Bo, you can be honest with me. What's going on?
Come on, babe. You know I never cheat on you.
With their relationship teetering on the edge, Bo made a promise to Shakima.
Jaquavia told her that's not his kid, she's lying on me, and I'll prove it.
He said he would take the paternity test, but was certain they would come back negative.
I will take the test and you will see. Don't worry.
While Shakima was hoping for the best, she had her doubts.
She called me saying, if he fails these tests, I'm taking my son and I'm leaving.
Because believe me, my daughter is not going to deal with you and she know you cheating, because she's not going to stand for that.
But to everyone's surprise, the results indicate Bo is not the father.
The paternity results were negative, as Bo had predicted.
How did the other woman take the news?
Not well. She still believed that the child is his.
This girl was very adamant, I'm going to get your daughter and Bo. I'm going to take them down. This is his baby. He's going to claim it.
Was it possible this woman was involved in the killing somehow?
Well, thank you for coming in, and again, we're sorry for your loss.
Detectives are eager to speak with Bo's mistress, Destiny Burkett. But before they can track her down, she comes to them.
I got notified by dispatch that there was a female that wanted to speak with me in reference to Jaquavia Jackson.
Thank you for coming in, Miss Burkett.
Of course.
So tell us about your history with Mr. Jackson.
She was in a relationship with Jaquavia. She didn't know that he was married, and then when they split up, by that point, she was pregnant.
When I told him about the pregnancy, he wanted nothing to do with it.
He was in complete denial that the child was his.
Bo told her to leave him alone because he did not want his wife finding out that he had cheated. Eventually, he stopped accepting any of her calls and texts.
But what am I supposed to do? Raising a child alone isn't easy. So I decided to get the courts involved.
She wanted Jaquavia to start paying child support, and so she wanted him to take a paternity test.
She just wanted Bo to take accountability for his actions and assist her financially with their child.
But when the paternity test came back, it showed that Jaquavia wasn't the father.
However, Destiny isn't buying it.
She's like, I know he's the father. He was the only one I was with.
She said that she was absolutely convinced that Bo had rigged the DNA test.
So how do you think he rigged it?
Look at this.
Whenever someone comes to take a paternity test, a DNA test, they actually take a picture of whoever shows up.
When she looked at the photos, she knew it was not Jaquavia that had taken that test.
They look at the man in the photo, and she's right. It's clearly not Bo Jackson.
It's a completely different person. It would appear that he sent someone else to take the test in his place.
But that's not all.
My attorneys discovered that I wasn't the only one he did this to.
There was a second woman who came forward saying Bo did the exact same thing to her and faked a paternity test to avoid paying child support.
How many mistresses did Bo have?
While investigating the murder of Shakima Brown Jackson, detectives have discovered that her husband, Bo, had potentially gotten 2 other women pregnant.
I wasn't the only one he did this to.
2 women had come forward and requested paternity tests in an effort to try to get child support from Mr. Jackson. There was clear evidence that showed that he sent someone else other than himself to go take the DNA test in a clear attempt to try to show that he was not the father, even if he really was.
He had the person go to take the paternity test for him. That's out of the box. I've never heard of anybody doing that.
For you to sit down and plot something as crazy as this. He was sneaky, very sneaky. He's a liar. Everything came out his mouth was a lie.
And Destiny says when she found out about Bo's other pregnant mistress, the 2 women decided to join forces against him.
We had our attorneys submit for follow-up paternity testing and a court date set to argue our case.
Everything was leading up to their day in court. The courts had even subpoenaed witnesses.
One of those witnesses was Shakima Brown Jackson.
The court subpoenaed Shakima to help confirm that the man Bo sent to take the paternity test was indeed not Bo.
But Destiny says they never made it to their day in court.
The court date was scheduled for October 28th, the day after Shakima and Lavoy were murdered.
The hearing was supposed to be today, but here we are.
Detectives believe that this is not a coincidence. They are truly starting to believe that Bo Jackson's story of 2 drug dealers killing his wife and brother-in-law are bogus.
So we go out the next morning, we do a more comprehensive canvass of the neighborhood.
They noticed that the home directly across the street from the Jacksons' residence had security cameras set up.
We wanted to know, did it catch anything on camera? So we went up and tried to get the video from them.
But detectives are out of luck.
They advised us it doesn't work. It hasn't worked for months.
Sure wish I could be more help. Wait a minute, one other thing, though.
He did advise us that Jaquavia reached out to him and did ask about the camera. He wanted to know if his camera worked. The neighbor told him, no, my camera doesn't work. It hasn't worked in a while.
This as a major red flag. Why would Bo be concerned about if their cameras were working or not?
Thank you for your time.
Yes, sir.
That just, to me, added more suspicion towards Jaquavia.
And in speaking with another neighbor, investigators hit the jackpot.
Their security cameras are functioning.
The surveillance camera pointed towards Mr. Jackson's front yard and the beginning of the driveway in the mailbox.
Back at the station, detectives begin poring over the footage.
The detectives scrubbed through to about 10:20 p.m. on October 27th, which is when Bo claims the killers arrived. However, they watch the road and they don't see a single car pull up to the Jacksons' residence.
10:21. You hear these shots go off.
This could only mean one thing. The shots came from someone already inside the house.
Bo's story about Barry and City is a lie.
Nothing that Jaquavier had told me in our interview or the day that he talked to the deputies was corroborated with the video.
With this evidence, detectives have exactly what they need to obtain an arrest warrant for Jaquavier Bo Jackson.
Yeah, this is Hicks. We got him.
So we took arrest warrants that day for murder, aggravated assault, and several other charges, and we took him into custody. His demeanor went from nothing to all of a sudden, you got the wrong guy, trying to drum tears up or something, and act as if he was definitely the one person that did not do this, that he was being falsely arrested.
And the dramatics don't stop there.
It appears that Bo is very uncomfortable. He's wincing and shifting around in his seat.
Are you nervous?
It's not that at all, man. It's my stomach.
He claims to have had ulcers or something like that.
The detectives get him something to drink to try to soothe his stomach so they can move on with the interview.
Honestly, tell us what happened.
I told you. Leroy brought in some bad dudes who wanted drug money. He couldn't pay up, so they killed him.
Bo is adamant that what he said before was true.
Detectives tell Bo that the jig is up. They confront him with the surveillance footage and tell him that his story does not make sense.
It's then that Bo throws himself from his chair.
He's, oh man, you act like you don't believe me. Oh, my stomach. And he started acting like he was getting sick in the interview.
Babe, call the doctor.
He says his stomach is on fire.
Detectives suspect that Bo is faking the pain to get out of questioning, but they can't say for sure.
Bo is taken to the hospital to be treated before being sent to jail.
Get up. They wouldn't be getting any confessions out of him.
But even without a confession from the man himself, Bo goes to trial for double homicide on July 24th, 2023.
He pled not guilty. His defense, and remained to be the same defense, was that these two random people showed up to the house that night and shot and killed Lavoy and Shakima. That was the only defense they had.
When it's their turn, prosecutors present what they believe really happened.
They believe that things were on the rocks between Bo and Shakima.
I noticed my daughter wasn't happy anymore. She wasn't smiling anymore. She would, Mom, what do I need to do?
And when the letter arrived about a court-ordered paternity test for Bo's mistress, Destiny Burkett, Shakima had reached her breaking point.
Bo, what is this?
She couldn't believe her husband was being accused of fathering another woman's child.
They were talking about separation.
But when the paternity test came back negative, Shakima decided to give Bo one more chance.
Marriage was very sacred to Shakima. She wanted to trust her husband.
Now they're talking about trying to work things out.
However, Bo knew that his true colors were soon to be revealed.
Shakima received more letters from the court, now summoning her to be a witness in the paternity case.
She thought this was a follow-up court date to confirm that Bo wasn't the father.
Little did she know at the court date, she would have found out that her husband was accused of fathering children with multiple women and had faked the previous paternity test that he took.
She was about to learn the truth about everything.
Prosecutors argued that it wasn't a coincidence that Shakima died the day before they were due in court.
She was definitely gonna divorce him.
He'd been lying to her their entire marriage. He was possibly gonna lose everything he had. He wasn't going to have anywhere to go.
Not only would he lose his meal ticket if Shakima divorced him, but she also would have likely got custody of her child, and Bo would have had to pay her child support.
Bo couldn't let that happen. If Shakima didn't want to be with him and put up with his philandering ways, she had to go.
But why did Lavoy have to go too? Although Jaquavia Bo Jackson refuses to admit culpability in the double murder of his wife, Shakima Brown Jackson, and her brother, Lavoy Brown, prosecutors are confident in their theory of what happened.
Bo had been lying to Shakima about the other women he'd been sleeping around with.
And at the paternity hearing scheduled for October 28, 2021, Shakima was going to discover the truth.
He knew that would be the last straw in their marriage, and she'd likely divorce him. She would keep their home and their son.
He thought he was about to lose everything.
So Bo did the unthinkable.
I think he, on the fly, kind of concocted this idea of, I'm going to kill Shakima.
He grabbed the .38 caliber revolver and went into the living room.
She was just literally scrolling Facebook, comfortable on her own couch, watching videos when she was shot. Lavoy was asleep, and the initial gunshots scared him. He started to run, and he was shot in the back of the head, and he fell forward.
He just happened to be at the wrong place at the wrong time.
After Shakima and Lavoy were dead, Bo tried to stage the scene as if intruders had committed the crime.
Prosecutors believe Bo got rid of the .38 after he killed Shakima Lavoy, then used the .45 to stage a defensive shot.
And there's a good 3 or 4 minute gap between the group of shots that clearly are the murder shots, and then what we think is the defendant's sort of staged self-defense or defense of other shots that happened about 3 minutes later.
As the prosecution rests, the case is handed over to the jury to decide.
After the jury deliberated for some time, they came back with a verdict.
Jaquavia Bo Jackson was found guilty of 2 counts of malice murder, felony murder, aggravated assault, and possession of a firearm during a felony.
He's sentenced to life without parole, plus 10 years.
He'll spend the rest of his life in prison.
He never showed his emotions, even throughout the entire trial. Even once he was being sentenced, nothing changed. He had a very cold look on his face the entire time.
A follow paternity test determined Bo was the father of Destiny's baby boy. He wasn't the father of the second mistress baby.
For the family and friends of Shakima and Lavoy, it's a somber end to their loved one's story.
Justice has been served, even though, it's still heartbreaking.
There's no way you could tell me you loved her and turn around and do that. No. That was hate.
The child has to grow up without a dad, no mom, no nothing. I'm grandma, you know what I'm saying? I can't teach him manly things in spite of what I'm going through. I have to trust the process of God.
They should be remembered as people always trying to help. People that impacted their community, impacted their environment with fun and love.
I just want them to be remembered by their smile and laughter. It was always jokes with us. They're both goofy.
In honor of Shakima and her brother, Shakima's fellow Fulton County deputies created Operation Take a Stand, a new categorization system that helps police prioritize victims of domestic violence.
They came up with a system of picking out warrants that are based on domestic violence issues, and they did that in honor of Shakima.
Although there were no instances of domestic violence reported in Shakima and Bo's relationship prior to the murder, her family believes all the signs were there.
Look, I ain't trying to hear all that. I ain't trying to hear all that right now. Look.
I want young ladies to know these signs. Don't just sit there and argue. If you see that abuse, if you see that hurt, that pain, leave. It's not worth it, and it's not gonna get better. Believe me.
On the morning of December 14th, 1991, a quiet Saturday in the city of Federal Way, Washington, a routine trip to a local school became the beginning of one of the Pacific Northwest's most haunting unsolved murder investigations. Within a matter of hours, a peaceful suburban community would find itself confronting a crime so shocking that it would remain etched into local memory for decades. Parents who had once viewed school grounds as places of safety suddenly saw them through different eyes. Police officers who believed they were responding to another weekend call quickly realized they had entered a homicide investigation unlike any they had faced before. For more than 30 years, the identity of the person responsible remained unknown. Yet the smallest fragments of forensic evidence, carefully preserved from the very beginning, would ultimately survive long enough for science to reveal what time had tried to hide. Sarah Yarborough was 16 years old. She was a student at Federal Way High School, where she participated in school activities and was known among classmates and teachers as a responsible teenager with a bright future. Like many students her age, her life revolved around family, school, friendships, and plans for the future. Those who knew her later described a young woman remembered not because of public attention or notoriety, but because of her kindness and the ordinary life she had been living before was abruptly interrupted by violence. On that December weekend, Sarah had planned to participate in activities connected with her school's drill team. Early morning practices were familiar to students involved in athletics and extracurricular programs. And there was nothing about that Saturday that suggested it would become one of the darkest days in the history of the Federal Way community. Federal Way itself was a rapidly growing city located between Seattle and Tacoma. During the early 1990s, it was known primarily as a suburban community where families settled for its neighborhoods, schools, and access to major highways. Residents generally considered it a safe place to raise children. Schools functioned as centers of community life, hosting athletic competitions, performances, and weekend activities that regularly brought students on a campus outside normal classroom hours. Shortly after dawn, concern began spreading across the school grounds. Sarah was found on the campus of Federal Way High School after suffering fatal injuries. Emergency responders arrived quickly, but despite their efforts, it became clear that she could not be saved. The discovery immediately transformed the school into an active crime scene. Law enforcement officers from the local police department secured the area, preventing unauthorized access while investigators began documenting every possible piece of physical evidence. Crime scene technicians photographed the location from multiple angles, carefully recorded measurements, and collected anything that might later assist the investigation. Detectives understood that outdoor crime scenes present unique challenges. Rain, wind, changing temperatures, and foot traffic can destroy crucial evidence within hours. Every minute mattered. As news spread throughout Federal Way, shock quickly turned into fear. Parents arriving to learn what had happened struggled to comprehend how a violent crime could occur on school property. Students who had expected to spend the morning practicing with teammates instead found themselves confronted by police vehicles, crime scene tape, and investigators moving methodically across familiar grounds that now appeared unrecognizable. The murder of a teenager inside a school environment carries a particularly powerful emotional impact. Schools represent routine, education, and community. Violence within those spaces disrupts more than daily schedules. It challenges fundamental assumptions about safety itself. Detectives immediately began reconstructing Sarah's final known movements. Investigators interviewed family members, friends, classmates, teachers, coaches, and anyone who might have interacted with her during the days leading up to her death. Their objective was straightforward but enormously complex: establish an accurate timeline. When had she last been seen? Who expected to meet her that morning? Did anyone observe suspicious activity near the school? Were unfamiliar vehicles present? Did anyone hear unusual sound before dawn? Every answer generated new questions. Every witness contributed another fragment to an increasingly detailed chronology. At the same time, forensic specialists focused on the physical evidence. Although investigators did not publicly disclose every detail collected at the scene, they confirmed that biological evidence was recovered. In 1991, DNA profiling was still developing into the powerful investigative tool it would later become. Detectives recognized the importance of preserving biological material, even though contemporary. Technology could not always identify an unknown individual from extremely small samples. That decision would later prove critical. The investigation rapidly expanded beyond the immediate neighborhood. Roadblocks were considered. Tips poured into police headquarters. Residents contacted investigators after recalling unfamiliar people, suspicious vehicles, or unusual encounters occurring around the time of the murder. Every report required evaluation. Detectives organized information into investigative files that gradually expanded into thousands of pages. No possibility was dismissed without examination. Because Sarah had arrived at school early for scheduled activities, investigators worked to determine precisely when the attack occurred. Establishing that narrow time frame became essential. The smaller the window, the easier it became to identify potential witnesses or suspicious movements within the area. Unfortunately, outdoor crime scenes rarely provide ideal investigative conditions. Potential witnesses may drive through an area without noticing anything unusual. Passing motorists often cannot distinguish routine activity from criminal behavior. Darkness limits visibility. Weather affects physical evidence. The passage of even a few hours can dramatically complicate reconstruction efforts. Nevertheless, investigators remain determined. Search teams examined surrounding areas for discarded objects. Officers knocked on doors throughout nearby neighborhoods. Businesses were contacted. Anyone present near the school during the early morning hours became a potential source of information. Media coverage intensified almost immediately. Television broadcasts interrupted regular programming. Newspapers featured photographs of Sarah and appealed for public assistance. Community leaders encouraged anyone with information, regardless of how insignificant it seemed, to contact investigators. As days became weeks, detectives continued following every available lead. Some tips appeared promising before ultimately proving unrelated. Others consumed valuable investigative resources without producing meaningful evidence. This pattern is common in major homicide investigations. Public attention generates enormous volumes of information. But separating useful facts from mistaken observations demands patience and careful verification. The emotional toll upon Sarah's family cannot be measured through investigative files alone. While detectives assembled timelines and forensic reports, her loved ones faced the unimaginable reality that a daughter, family member, and friend would never return home. Every public appeal for information represented another reminder of the devastating uncertainty surrounding her death. For the broader Federal Way community, daily routines changed noticeably. Parents became more cautious. Students avoided walking alone. School security procedures received renewed attention. Conversations throughout neighborhoods centered on one question: Who could have committed such a crime? Despite extensive investigative efforts, no immediate answer emerged. Detectives examined potential suspects, evaluated witness statements, and continued processing forensic evidence as laboratory technology allowed. They remained confident that preserving every available exhibit offered the best chance for eventual resolution, even if immediate identification proved impossible. That commitment reflected an important investigative philosophy. A homicide investigation does not necessarily end when immediate leads disappear. Evidence retains value. Scientific methods evolve. Cases that appear unsolvable today may become solvable tomorrow. Although investigators in December 1991 could not predict precisely how forensic science would develop over the following decades, they understood enough to preserve biological evidence with extraordinary care. Every item entered documented chain of custody procedures. Laboratory examinations were conducted according to available scientific standards. Evidence not consumed during testing returned to secure storage. Those decisions appeared routine at the time. Years later, they would become the foundation upon which the entire investigation would ultimately depend. As winter settled across western Washington, weeks gradually became months. The intense media attention surrounding Sarah Yarborough's murder slowly diminished. The homicide investigation, however, continued. Detectives reviewed witness interviews repeatedly, searching for overlooked inconsistencies. Potential suspects were examined and eliminated based on available evidence. Forensic laboratories completed additional analyses whenever possible. Yet no arrest followed. The unknown offender remained unidentified. What had begun as an urgent active investigation slowly assumed another, far more difficult identity. It became a cold case. For Sarah's family, the passage of time offered no relief from unanswered questions. For investigators, every anniversary served as a reminder that justice remained incomplete. And inside secure evidence storage, preserved biological material waited silently, holding answers that the science of 1991 was not yet capable of revealing, but that future generations of investigators would one day revisit with technologies unimaginable on the morning a 16-year-old student's life was taken on the grounds of her own high school. In the hours following Sarah Yarborough's murder on December 14, 1991, investigators from the Federal Way Police Department began what would become one of the largest homicide investigations in the city's history. Their immediate objective was clear: identify everyone who had been near the campus of Federal Way High School during the narrow time window before Sarah's body was discovered. Detectives understood that the earliest hours of any homicide investigation often produce the most valuable information. Witnesses' memories are freshest, physical evidence is least disturbed, and potential suspects may still be within the area. Every minute mattered. The school grounds were secured as a crime scene. Investigators carefully documented the location through photographs, measurements, and detailed notes before collecting physical evidence. Outdoor crime scenes present unique challenges. Weather conditions, changing temperatures, and foot traffic can quickly alter or destroy evidence. Detectives therefore worked systematically to preserve every item that might later prove significant. Among the evidence collected was biological material that would eventually become the most important forensic evidence in the entire investigation. At the time, however, no one could know how valuable that evidence would become decades later. Detectives immediately began reconstructing Sarah's final known movements. They interviewed family members, friends, classmates, coaches, school staff, and anyone who might have seen her before she arrived at the school that morning. Investigators worked to establish a precise timeline, asking when she had left home, when she was expected to arrive, and who had last seen her alive. Building an accurate chronology, is one of the first priorities in every homicide investigation, because even small differences in time can significantly narrow the list of potential witnesses or suspects. Investigators also focused on the area surrounding the high school. Officers canvassed nearby neighborhoods, speaking with residents who might have observed unusual activity during the early morning hours. They asked about unfamiliar vehicles, strangers walking near the campus, suspicious sounds, or anything that seemed out of the ordinary. In many homicide investigations, witnesses initially fail to recognize the importance of what they observed until they learn that a crime has occurred. Detectives, therefore, encouraged members of the public to report even seemingly insignificant details. As news of the murder spread, local media provided extensive coverage. Television stations interrupted regular programming with updates, while newspapers published appeals for information. Law enforcement emphasized that even the smallest observation could assist the investigation. Tips quickly began arriving from across the region. Some callers reported suspicious people they believed they had seen near the school. Others described unfamiliar vehicles or recalled encounters that seemed unusual only after learning about the homicide. Each tip required careful evaluation. Experienced investigators know that public interest in a major homicide often generates a large volume of information. While many reports are made in good faith, not all prove relevant. Detectives therefore reviewed every lead, comparing witness accounts with established timelines and available physical evidence. Some tips were eliminated quickly. Others required additional interviews or follow-up investigation before they could be ruled out. At the same time, forensic specialists began analyzing the evidence collected from the crime scene. In 1991, DNA analysis was still developing as an investigative tool. Laboratories could perform certain forms of DNA testing, but the technology was less sensitive than it would become in later decades. Samples needed to be of sufficient quality and quantity, and the databases that now allow rapid comparisons of DNA profiles did not yet exist in their modern form. Nevertheless, investigators recognized that biological evidence had the potential to become critically important. Rather than exhausting every sample through available testing methods, forensique personnel carefully préservait le matériel whenever possible. This reflected an important principle of evidence management. Once biological evidence is consumed, it cannot be recovered. Preserving portions of samples for future examination ensured that later scientific advances could be applied if necessary. The investigation remained active throughout the weeks that followed. Detectives reviewed Sarah's personal background, searching for any indication that she had been specifically targeted or had encountered someone who might have posed a threat. As is standard practice in homicide investigations, investigators examined multiple possibilities while avoiding premature conclusions. Individuals with potential knowledge of the case were interviewed, and available information was assessed against the physical evidence. As the investigation progressed, no immediate suspect emerged, without a clear identification supported by the available evidence. Detectives continued pursuing multiple investigative avenues simultaneously. This is often the most challenging phase of a homicide investigation. Public expectations remain high, media attention is intense, and investigators face increasing pressure to produce results while remaining guided by the evidence rather than speculation. The murder deeply affected the Federal Way community. Schools increased awareness of student safety, and many parents became more cautious about allowing children to travel alone during early morning or evening hours. Community members attended vigils and memorial events honoring Sarah's memory, while local officials expressed their commitment to supporting the investigation. Despite the extensive investigative effort, months passed without an arrest. Law enforcement agencies periodically reviewed the case, re-examining witness statements and forensic findings in an effort to identify overlooked connections. Cold case investigations often involve repeated analysis of existing evidence because information that appears insignificant at one point may become meaningful when viewed alongside newly developed evidence or investigative techniques. One of the investigation's greatest strengths proved to be its careful evidence preservation. Every significant exhibit was documented, labeled, and maintained through a secure chain of custody. These procedures ensured that years later investigators could demonstrate exactly where the evidence had been, who had handled it, and under what conditions it had been stored. Such documentation is essential for maintaining the integrity of forensic evidence over long periods of time. As the 1990s progressed, advances in forensic science continued at a rapid pace. DNA profiling became increasingly reliable and more widely accepted within criminal investigations. Law enforcement agencies across North America began recognizing that biological evidence collected years earlier might hold answers that earlier technology could not reveal. For the Sarah Yarborough investigation, this scientific progress offered cautious optimism. Although no immediate breakthrough occurred, investigators understood that preserving biological evidence had created opportunities for future testing. Every improvement in laboratory science increased the possibility that the unidentified DNA recovered during the investigation might one day be associated with a specific individual. By the end of the decade, Sarah Yarborough's murder had become one of Washington state's most significant unsolved homicide cases. Detectives continued reviewing the investigation whenever new information became available. While forensic laboratories retained the biological evidence under conditions designed to preserve its scientific value, the case had entered what investigators refer to as the cold case phase, not because interest had disappeared, but because all immediately available investigative leads had been exhausted. Yet experienced homicide investigators understand that a cold case is not a closed case. As long as evidence remains preserved and new scientific methods continue to emerge, the possibility of identifying an offender remains alive. For Sarah's family, however, each passing year represented another anniversary without answers. The search for justice continued, sustained by careful investigative work completed in the earliest days of the case and by the hope that one day, advances in forensic science would succeed where conventional investigative methods had reached their limits. As the months following Sarah Yarborough's murder turned into years, the investigation entered a new and far more difficult phase. The urgency of the first days had given way to the patience required of a long-term homicide investigation. Detectives had interviewed witnesses, processed the crime scene, followed numerous leads, and examined available forensic evidence, yet no arrest had been made. Although the public saw fewer headlines as time passed, the case itself was never considered closed. Instead, it became one of Washington state's most significant cold cases, preserved for the day when new information or new science might provide the breakthrough investigators have been seeking. In homicide investigations, the term cold case does not mean that investigators have stopped working. Rather, it indicates that all immediately available investigative leads have been exhausted. Detectives continue to review evidence, evaluate new information, and revisit the case whenever advances in investigative techniques create additional opportunities. Sarah Yarborough's case followed that pattern. Throughout the 1990s, investigators maintained the case file, preserving interview transcripts, forensic reports, crime scene documentation, photographs, and physical evidence. These records represented years of investigative work and ensured that future detectives could understand not only what evidence had been collected, but also why particular investigative decisions have been made. Careful documentation is essential in long-term investigations because personnel inevitably change. Over time, detectives retire, supervisors move to other assignments, and agencies adopt new technologies. Comprehensive records allow new investigators to continue the work without losing the knowledge accumulated by those who came before them. The biological evidence recovered in 1991 remained among the most important elements of the investigation. Laboratory personnel preserved it according to accepted forensic standards, recognizing that scientific capabilities would likely improve over time. This approach reflected a broader change occurring within forensic science during the 1990s. DNA profiling was becoming increasingly reliable and was beginning to transform criminal investigations throughout North America. Early DNA testing had important limitations. Laboratories often required relatively large biological samples. Analysis could be time-consuming, and national DNA databases were still developing. Nevertheless, each improvement expanded the investigative possibilities for both current and unsolved cases. Detectives across the United States began reviewing older homicide investigations in which biological evidence had been carefully preserved, recognizing that material collected years earlier might now yield information that had previously been unattainable. Federal Way investigators periodically re-examined Sarah Yarborough's case with this possibility in mind. As laboratory methods improved, previously collected evidence could be reassessed using more sensitive analytical techniques. Each review represented another opportunity to determine whether advances in forensic science could identify an unknown individual or eliminate investigative uncertainties. Public interest in the case also continued. On anniversaries of Sarah's murder, law enforcement agencies and local media renewed appeals for information. These appeals served several purposes. They reminded the community that the investigation remained active, encouraged witnesses who had never come forward to contact police, and prompted individuals to reconsider observations that might have seemed insignificant years earlier. In some cold cases, witnesses who were reluctant to speak at the time of the crime later decide to provide information after circumstances change. Investigators carefully evaluated every new tip. Experience has shown that cold case investigations often receive information many years after the original crime. Sometimes witnesses remember additional details. Sometimes relationships change, making people more willing to speak with law enforcement. In other cases, technological advances allow investigators to connect older information in ways that were previously impossible. For these reasons, detectives remained open to new evidence while continuing to assess it against the established facts of the investigation. The development of computerized record systems also improved investigative capabilities. During the years following Sarah's murder, many law enforcement agencies transitioned from paper-based record keeping to digital databases. This evolution made it easier to organize case materials, compare information across jurisdictions, and search investigative records more efficiently. Although technology could not solve the case by itself, improved information management strengthened detectives' ability to review large volumes of evidence. As DNA technology matured, forensic laboratories adopted increasingly sophisticated methods for analyzing biological evidence. Polymerase chain reaction, PCR, techniques allowed scientists to obtain DNA profiles from much smaller samples than had previously been possible. Improvements in sensitivity meant that evidence collected decades earlier could sometimes produce complete or more informative DNA profiles than earlier examinations had achieved. The expansion of forensic DNA databases represented another important development. In the United States, the Combined DNA Index System, CODIS, gradually became an essential investigative tool. CODIS allows law enforcement laboratories to compare DNA profiles obtained from crime scenes with profiles collected from qualifying offenders and, in some jurisdictions, from other investigative sources as permitted by law. When a match occurs, investigators gain an important lead that can then be confirmed through additional investigation. As forensic capabilities expanded, detectives revisited the evidence collected in Sarah Yarborough's case. The preserved biological material remained suitable for continued examination, allowing investigators to apply newer analytical methods as they became available. This demonstrated the importance of careful evidence preservation during the original investigation. Decisions made in 1991 continued to create investigative opportunities many years later. Despite these scientific advances, however, no immediate identification resulted. This illustrates an important reality of many cold cases. Improved forensic technology increases investigative possibilities, but it cannot guarantee an immediate solution. If the individual responsible has never submitted a DNA sample to a lawfully maintained forensic database, a direct database comparison may produce no match. In such circumstances, investigators must continue exploring additional investigative strategies while preserving the evidence for future analysis. The Sarah Yarborough investigation remained active within this evolving forensic landscape. Detectives recognized that every improvement in DNA science narrowed the gap between what was currently possible and what might become possible in the future. Rather than viewing the absence of a suspect as the end of the investigation, they understood that scientific progress itself could generate entirely new investigative avenues. For Sarah's family, the passage of time remained extraordinarily difficult. Each year without an arrest represented another reminder that the person responsible had not yet been identified. Law enforcement maintained communication with the family, providing updates when appropriate and reaffirming that the investigation continued. Although public attention naturally shifted toward newer cases, investigators remained committed to pursuing every reasonable opportunity to identify the offender. By the early 2000s, Sarah Yarborough's murder had become widely recognized as one of Washington's enduring unsolved homicide investigations. The case was regularly reviewed, preserved evidence remained available for future testing, and detectives continued monitoring developments in forensic science. The investigation had outlasted changes in personnel, investigative methods, and technology. Yet its central objective remained unchanged: identify the individual whose DNA had been left behind at the crime scene. What investigators could not yet know was that another revolutionary development in forensic science was approaching. Traditional DNA database comparisons had transformed criminal investigations, but an even more powerful technique, one capable of identifying suspects through distant family relationships rather than direct database matches, would soon redefine the possibilities of cold case investigations across the United States. For the Sarah Yarborough investigation, that breakthrough was still years away. Yet because the evidence had been preserved with exceptional care and the case had never been abandoned, detectives would eventually be ready to use that new technology when it finally became available. For more than 2 decades after Sarah Yarborough's murder, investigators pursued every traditional avenue available to them. Witnesses had been interviewed, physical evidence had been analyzed, and the preserved DNA profile had been compared through established forensic databases as technology evolved. Yet despite years of effort, no direct identification emerged. The absence of match did not diminish the importance of the DNA evidence. Instead, it demonstrated one of the fundamental limitations of conventional forensic database searching. A crime scene profile can only produce a direct match if the responsible individual's DNA has already been lawfully entered into the database. By the early 2010s, forensic science had entered a period of rapid innovation. DNA analysis had become faster, more sensitive, and capable of generating useful information from increasingly small biological samples. Laboratories could produce highly reliable DNA profiles from evidence that earlier generations of scientists might have considered insufficient for testing. At the same time, advances in computing and genetics were creating entirely new possibilities for criminal investigations. One of the most significant developments was the emergence of investigative genetic genealogy. Unlike traditional forensic DNA comparisons, which seek an exact match between a crime scene profile and an existing forensic database, investigative genetic genealogy approaches the problem differently. Rather than asking whether the DNA belongs to someone already known to law enforcement, it asks whether the DNA can identify biological relatives of the unknown individual. Even distant relatives may provide enough information to begin reconstructing family relationships that ultimately lead investigators towards suspect. This methodology had already demonstrated its potential in several high-profile investigations. Its successful application showed that carefully preserved biological evidence from decades-old crimes could generate entirely new investigative leads, even when traditional forensic database searches had produced no results. For investigators working the Sarah Yarborough case, these developments represented a significant opportunity. Before any genealogical work could begin, however, detectives and forensic scientists needed to determine whether the biological evidence collected in 1991 remained suitable for advanced DNA analysis. Proper evidence preservation over many years proved essential. The careful handling, storage, and documentation of the biological material ensured that modern laboratories could evaluate the evidence using techniques that had not existed when the crime occurred. The forensic review began with the existing DNA evidence. Scientists assessed the quality and integrity of the preserved biological material, confirming that it remained appropriate for further examination. Modern laboratory procedures included rigorous quality control measures designed to prevent contamination and ensure that any resulting DNA profile accurately reflected the original evidence. Once the scientific review confirmed that the evidence remained viable, investigators considered how emerging genealogical methods might assist the case. Investigative genetic genealogy differs from routine forensic laboratory analysis in several important respects. Traditional forensic DNA profiling examines specific genetic markers that are highly effective for individual identification within criminal justice databases. Genealogical analysis uses a broader range of genetic information to identify potential biological relationships across extended family lines. The result is not an immediate identification of a suspect, but rather the development of investigative leads based on documented family connections. This process requires close collaboration between multiple disciplines. Forensic scientists generate and validate the DNA data. Genetic genealogists analyze potential family relationships. Investigators examine historical records, public documents, and other available information to verify those relationships and determine whether individuals identified through genealogical research could reasonably be connected to the investigation. No single discipline solves the case independently. Each contributes part of the overall investigative process. As Federal Way detectives evaluated these emerging methods, they also recognized the importance of maintaining established investigative standards. Genealogical information alone does not establish criminal responsibility. Any lead generated through family history research must be supported by additional evidence, including direct forensic comparison whenever possible. This layered approach helps ensure that investigative conclusions remain grounded in reliable scientific and legal standards. At the same time, law enforcement agencies throughout the United States were developing policies governing the responsible use of investigative genetic genealogy. Because the technique involves the analysis of genetic relationships rather than direct forensic database matches, investigators worked within applicable legal frameworks and departmental procedures. These safeguards reflected the need to balance investigative effectiveness with appropriate consideration of privacy and due process. The Sarah Yarborough investigation became one of many long-term homicide cases that stood to benefit from these scientific advances. Years of careful evidence preservation had ensured that the biological material remained available for modern analysis. Equally important, detectives had maintained comprehensive investigative files documenting witness interviews, timelines, forensic findings, and earlier investigative efforts. These records would allow any new genetic leads to be evaluated within the full historical context of the case. Cold case investigations often require exactly this combination of old and new. Evidence collected decades earlier provides the scientific foundation. Historical investigative records supply context. Modern technology creates opportunities that did not previously exist. Experienced investigators then integrate these elements into a renewed investigative strategy. The process is deliberate rather than dramatic. Scientific analysis requires time. Genealogical research involves the careful examination of historical records across multiple generations. Each potential family connection must be independently verified before investigators can determine whether it has any relevance to the homicide investigation. Throughout this period, Sarah Yarborough's family continued to wait for answers. Although the investigation remained active behind the scenes, much of the work occurring within forensic laboratories and genealogical research could not be discussed publicly. Protecting the integrity of an active homicide investigation often requires investigators to limit the release of information until leads have been fully evaluated. Meanwhile, advances in DNA technology continued at a remarkable pace. Sequencing methods became increasingly sophisticated. Computational tools improved the ability to analyze complex genetic data. Genealogical research techniques expanded as historical records became more accessible through digital archives and other sources. These developments collectively increased the likelihood that unidentified DNA from older homicide investigations could eventually be associated with a specific individual. For Federal Way investigators, the emergence of investigative genetic genealogy represented something they had been waiting for since the earliest days of the case. A genuinely new investigative pathway. Unlike previous reviews, this approach offered the possibility of identifying an unknown individual even in the absence of a direct forensic database match. It did not guarantee success, but it created an opportunity that had never before existed. The careful work performed in December 1991, collecting biological evidence, preserving it according to accepted forensic standards, and maintaining an unbroken chain of custody, had ensured that the investigation would be ready when science finally caught up. After more than 2 decades as a cold case, Sarah Yarborough's murder was about to enter an entirely new phase. The search would no longer depend solely on witnesses remembering events from 1991 or on a suspect already appearing in a forensic database. Instead, investigators would begin following a trail written not in eyewitness testimony, but in inherited DNA, one generation at a time. For decades, the case had remained frozen in time. The evidence was locked away in storage rooms, the photographs had faded, and the investigators who first walked through the crime scene had long since retired. The world had moved on, but one silent witness remained untouched, a microscopic trace of DNA left behind by the person responsible. At the time of the original investigation, that evidence had been collected carefully, but science had not yet caught up with the questions investigators desperately needed answered. Traditional forensic testing could confirm that biological material belonged to an unknown male, but could not reveal his identity. The DNA profile existed, but there was no name attached to it. It was a ghost written into a genetic code. Years passed, technology advanced, and slowly, a new method began changing the way cold cases were investigated forever. It was called investigative genetic genealogy. Unlike traditional DNA matching, which compares evidence against law enforcement databases containing profiles from convicted offenders or arrested individuals, investigative genetic genealogy works differently. It uses distant genetic relationships found through public genealogy databases to build a family tree backward and forward until investigators can identify a possible suspect. The process begins with a question that once seemed impossible. Not who is this DNA, but who are this person's relatives? The preserved DNA evidence was carefully re-examined by forensic specialists. Scientists extracted the genetic material and created a profile detailed enough to compare against available genealogy databases. The process was slow, complicated, and filled with uncertainty. A single mistake could send investigators down the wrong path. But the DNA was finally ready to speak. When the genetic profile was uploaded into a genealogy database, the first results did not reveal a killer. Instead, they revealed something much more complicated: distant matches. People who shared small portions of DNA with the unknown suspect. Most of these individuals had no idea they were connected to the investigation. They were ordinary people who had submitted DNA samples years earlier while searching for lost relatives, researching family histories, or simply exploring their ancestry. But hidden inside those family connections was the answer investigators had been searching for. Genealogists began constructing a massive family tree. They examined surnames, birth records, marriage certificates, census documents, obituaries, and historical archives. Each connection became another thread in a growing web. The investigation had transformed from a traditional manhunt into a historical puzzle. Thousands of names had to be examined. Hundreds of family branches had to be eliminated. Every possibility had to be tested. The investigators were no longer looking only at suspects. They were looking at generations. A great-grandparent, a distant cousin, a forgotten family line, a branch of a tree that had never before been connected to the crime. The work required extraordinary patience. Genealogists had to separate coincidence from true genetic relationships. A distant DNA match could point toward a suspect's family, but it could also lead investigators thousands of miles away from the truth. The team followed every clue carefully. They studied where families lived. They tracked movements across decades. They examined patterns that ordinary police work could never reveal. Slowly, the enormous family tree began shrinking. The number of possibilities became smaller. The unknown DNA donor was no longer a faceless shadow. He had a history. He had ancestors. He had relatives. And eventually, investigators reached a name. But finding a potential suspect was only the beginning. Law enforcement understood that genetic genealogy alone was not enough to make an arrest. The DNA connections provided a direction, not a final conclusion. Investigators still needed traditional evidence to prove that the person identified was actually responsible. So they began the next phase: surveillance, background checks, timeline analysis. The suspect's entire life was reconstructed. Where had he lived at the time of the crime? Did he have access to the victim? Did his movements match the timeline? Was there anything that connected him directly to the evidence collected decades earlier? Every detail mattered. For investigators who had spent years chasing dead ends, this moment was both exciting and dangerous. Cold cases often produce false hope. A promising lead can disappear as quickly as it appears. But this time, something was different. The genetic trail was not pointing toward a random possibility. It was pointing toward someone whose past was beginning to align with the evidence. The DNA that had remained silent for decades was finally revealing a story. A story written through generations. A story hidden inside family connections. A story that proved time could hide the truth, but it could not erase it. As investigators moved closer to confirming the suspect's identity, the case entered its most critical stage. The question was no longer whether science could solve the mystery. The question was, after all these years, would the person responsible finally face justice? For years, the case had existed in the space between hope and despair. Investigators had carried the memory of the victim, the unanswered questions, and the frustration of knowing that somewhere in the world, the person responsible had continued living a normal life while the truth remained buried. But now, after decades of silence, the investigation had reached a turning point. The DNA trail had produced a name. However, a name was not a conviction. A possibility was not proof. The investigators understood that the most dangerous moment in any cold case is when a breakthrough appears. A new lead can create excitement, but excitement cannot replace evidence. Every discovery had to survive the same questions that had challenged the investigation from the beginning. Could this person truly be connected to the crime? Could the DNA evidence confirm the connection? And most importantly, would the facts stand up in court? The suspect identified through genetic genealogy was placed under intense scrutiny. Investigators began reconstructing his life piece by piece, searching for connections that might have been invisible for decades. They examined his background, his movements, his relationships, his employment history. Every location where he had lived became part of the investigation. Every year of his life became another chapter to analyze. The team compared the suspect's timeline with the timeline of the crime. They looked for opportunities, moments when his path could have crossed with the victim's. They searched for anything that could either strengthen the case or eliminate him completely. Because after waiting so many years, investigators could not afford to make a mistake. The suspect was not immediately confronted. Instead, detectives watched carefully from a distance. They needed more than suspicion. They needed confirmation. One of the most important steps was obtaining a new DNA sample. Investigators knew that the original crime scene evidence was powerful, but a direct comparison would provide the strongest possible confirmation. If the suspect's DNA matched the genetic material recovered decades earlier, the mystery that had haunted the case would finally have an answer. The challenge was collecting that sample legally and without compromising the investigation. In many cold cases, detectives rely on discarded items, objects that contain biological material left behind during everyday activities. A cup, a bottle, a personal item, something that could provide DNA for comparison. The science was extraordinary, but the process remained old-fashioned detective work. Patience, observation, discipline. Investigators waited. They followed. They documented. And eventually, they obtained the evidence they needed. The sample was sent to the laboratory. For everyone involved, those days were filled with uncertainty. The entire investigation had reached a single moment. Decades of unanswered questions, years of searching, and countless hours of work all came down to one scientific result. Then the call came. The DNA comparison was a match. The person investigators had identified through genetic genealogy was not simply a possible relative of the unknown DNA contributor. He was the source of the DNA left behind at the crime scene. The discovery changed everything. A case that had once seemed impossible to solve had finally moved forward. But even with this breakthrough, investigators still had to confront another challenge: understanding who this person was and how he had managed to avoid detection for so long. To the outside world, he had lived an ordinary existence. He had built a life. He had relationships. He had routines. He had walked through the same communities as everyone else, carrying a secret that only science had uncovered. That reality was one of the most unsettling aspects of cold cases. Sometimes, the person investigators are searching for is not hiding in some distant place. Sometimes, they're living quietly among everyone else. The arrest operation required careful planning. After decades had passed, investigators knew they were not only seeking justice for a crime, they were also reopening wounds that had never fully healed. The victim's family had spent years wondering whether the truth would ever come. They had lived with uncertainty. They had waited through anniversaries, holidays, and milestones without answers. Now, for the first time, there was a possibility of closure. When law enforcement finally moved forward, the moment represented the end of one journey and the beginning of another. The suspect was taken into custody. A man who had once been protected by the limitations of technology was now facing the consequences of a discovery made possible by that same technology. The arrest sent a powerful message. Time does not erase evidence. It does not erase victims. And it does not guarantee that someone can escape forever. But the investigation was not finished. An arrest was only the beginning. Prosecutors now had to transform decades-old evidence into a case strong enough to convince a jury. They had to explain the science of genetic genealogy. They had to present the history of the investigation. They had to show how a single biological trace had traveled through time and finally led investigators to the person responsible. And they had to answer the question that remained at the heart of the case. Why? Why did this happen? Why did the suspect choose to commit such a terrible act? And why did it take so many years before justice finally arrived? The answers would come from the courtroom. But before that happened, investigators needed to uncover every remaining detail of the crime. The victim's final moments and the evidence that had survived across generations. The DNA had opened the door. Now, the truth had to walk through it. The arrest had finally happened. After decades of uncertainty, investigators had a suspect in custody and a DNA match that connected him to the evidence recovered years earlier. For many cases, this would feel like the final chapter. But for detectives and prosecutors, it was only the beginning. A cold case solved through DNA is not solved by science alone. The genetic breakthrough may identify the person, but justice requires a complete story. Investigators must still answer the questions that matter most. What happened? How did it happen? And how can they prove it beyond reasonable doubt? The investigation returned to the beginning, back to the crime scene, back to the evidence collected years earlier, and back to the victim whose life had been taken far too soon. Every detail had to be examined again. Every report had to be reviewed. Every photograph had to be studied with fresh eyes. Decades earlier, investigators had documented everything they could. At the time, some pieces of evidence may have seemed small or insignificant. But advances in forensic science had transformed those forgotten details into powerful tools. The crime scene became a time capsule, a place where the past had been preserved. Forensic experts carefully reviewed the original evidence. They looked beyond what investigators of the past could see. Modern technology allowed them to analyze materials with a level of precision that would have been impossible during the original investigation. A single biological trace that once provided only limited information had become the key to identifying the person responsible. But DNA was only one part of the story. Investigators began rebuilding the timeline. They studied the victim's final known movements. They interviewed witnesses again. They examined old statements and compared them with the new information. They searched for connections between the suspect and the victim, connections that had remained hidden because investigators did not know who they were looking for. This was one of the most powerful aspects of solving a cold case. The investigation was no longer searching through an endless universe of possibilities. It finally had direction. The suspect's past became the focus. Where was he? Who did he know? What opportunities did he have? What decisions placed him in the right place at the wrong time? Detectives discovered that the suspect had not been randomly connected to the case. His history contained details that matched the evidence collected decades earlier. Places, dates, circumstances, small pieces of information that, when placed together, created a much larger picture. For the victim's family, these discoveries brought complicated emotions. For years, they had lived without answers. They had wondered whether the person responsible would ever be found. They had carried memories of the victim while watching the world move forward. Now, the truth was finally emerging. But truth can be painful. A solved case does not bring back the person who was lost. It does not erase the years of grief. It does not undo the damage caused by one terrible act. What it can do is provide something that families of victims often spend decades searching for. An explanation. A sense that the person they loved was not forgotten. And the knowledge that the person responsible could no longer hide behind the passage of time. As prosecutors prepared their case, they knew they would face challenges. The defense would question everything. They would question the reliability of the evidence. They would question the methods used to identify the suspect. They would question whether decades-old memories and records could still be trusted. The prosecution had to build a bridge between the past and the present. They had to show the jury that this was not simply a story about DNA. It was a story about evidence, a story about persistence, a story about investigators who refused to allow a victim's name to become just another forgotten case file. The genetic genealogy process would become a major part of the trial. Experts would explain how distant DNA relatives helped investigators construct a family tree and narrow down the possible identity of the unknown individual. For many people, this was a revolutionary moment. A crime committed before the digital age had been solved by technology that did not exist when the investigation began. The past had been reopened by the future. But as the courtroom preparations continued, another question remained. After all the years of investigation, after the DNA breakthrough, after the arrest, would the suspect finally admit what happened? Or would he continue fighting against the evidence that had followed him for decades? The answer would soon come inside a courtroom, where the victim's story would finally be heard in full, and where a jury would decide whether the trail of evidence truly led to justice. The courtroom was filled with a sense of history. For decades, the case had existed only in old files, fading photographs, and the memories of those who refused to forget. The victim's name had remained connected to an unanswered question, a mystery that had survived through generations. But now, after years of waiting, the story was finally being told in front of a judge and jury. The person accused of the crime was sitting only a few feet away. For the first time, the evidence collected so many years earlier was being presented alongside the man it had always been searching for. The trial was not simply about what happened on the day of the crime. It was about everything that happened afterward. The decades of investigation, the unanswered questions, the scientific breakthrough, and the determination to uncover the truth no matter how much time had passed. The prosecution began by presenting the timeline of the case. They reminded the jury that this investigation had not started with a suspect. It had started with a victim, a person whose life had been taken, a family left searching for answers, a community that had carried the weight of an unresolved tragedy. The prosecutors carefully explained how the evidence had survived, how investigators from the original case had preserved critical materials, how forensic science had evolved, and how a small biological trace had eventually become the connection between the crime scene and the accused. For many members of the jury, the concept of investigative genetic genealogy was unfamiliar. It was not the type of evidence they had seen in ordinary criminal cases. Experts took the stand to explain the process. They described how DNA does not simply identify individuals. It can reveal relationships between people. By comparing genetic information with publicly available genealogy data, investigators were able to locate distant relatives of the unknown DNA contributor. From those connections, they built a family tree, a massive network of names and relationships. Slowly, carefully, they narrowed the possibilities until only a small number of individuals remained. Then traditional police work took over. Investigators confirmed the suspect's identity. They collected additional evidence. They compared the new DNA sample with the original crime scene DNA. And the result was clear. The DNA belonged to the accused. The prosecution emphasized that this was not a coincidence. It was not simply a family connection. It was a direct scientific link between the suspect and evidence left behind at the scene decades earlier. But the defense had a different strategy. They challenged the investigation. They questioned the reliability of genetic genealogy. They argued that the passage of time created uncertainty. They reminded the jury that memories could fade and witnesses could make mistakes. Their goal was simple: create enough doubt. Because in a criminal trial, the burden was not on the accused to prove innocence. The burden was on the prosecution to prove guilt beyond reasonable doubt. Every piece of evidence mattered. Every explanation mattered. Every unanswered question mattered. The prosecution responded by showing that the DNA evidence was supported by the broader investigation. The genetic match did not stand alone. It was one part of a larger picture built from years of work. The evidence told a consistent story. A story that began with a crime scene. A story that traveled through decades. A story that eventually led investigators to the person sitting inside the courtroom. For the victim's family, watching the trial was an emotional experience unlike anything they had faced before. They had spent years imagining this moment. They had wondered what the person responsible would look like, what he would say, whether he would show regret, whether he understood the pain caused by his actions. But sometimes, justice does not come with an apology. Sometimes, closure comes from finally knowing the truth. The courtroom became the place where the victim's voice, silent for so many years, was represented through evidence. Every photograph, every statement, every scientific result, every piece of information collected over decades. Together, they created a complete picture. As the trial moved forward, the jury was asked to make one of the most important decisions possible. Could they trust the evidence? Could they believe the timeline? Could they conclude that the person before them was responsible? After decades of uncertainty, the fate of the accused was now in their hands. Outside the courthouse, the world watched as a question that had remained unanswered for so long approached its final moment. A case once considered impossible to solve had reached its final chapter. But before the verdict, one final battle remained. The prosecution had presented the evidence. The defense had challenged it. Now, the jury had to decide whether the DNA trail that began decades earlier had truly led them to justice. The final arguments marked the end of a journey that had stretched across decades. For the prosecution, the case was about persistence. They argued that justice delayed was not justice denied. They reminded the jury that the passage of time had never erased the evidence, only delayed the technology needed to understand it. The DNA recovered from the crime scene had remained unchanged for years, waiting for science to catch up. They urged the jurors to consider the investigation as a whole. Not one piece of evidence, not one witness, not one scientific test, but the complete picture, a carefully preserved crime scene, a DNA profile that remained consistent over decades, a genetic genealogy investigation that narrowed the search to a single individual, a direct comparison confirming that the biological evidence recovered from the scene belonged to the defendant. The prosecution argued that every step had been independently verified, each one reinforcing the next until there was only one reasonable conclusion. The defense offered a different perspective. They cautioned the jury against placing too much confidence in modern technology. They emphasized that the crime had occurred many years earlier, making it impossible to revisit the original scene exactly as it had existed. Witnesses had aged. Some were no longer alive. Memories had faded. Physical evidence, they argued, should always be viewed with caution after so much time. The defense suggested that the investigation had become focused on one suspect after the genealogical breakthrough and questioned whether alternative possibilities had received equal consideration. It was the jury's responsibility to weigh those competing arguments. They listened carefully to the closing statements. They reviewed photographs. They examined forensic reports. They considered testimony from investigators, forensic scientists, genealogists, and expert witnesses who had explained how decades-old evidence had been preserved and analyzed. Then they left the courtroom to deliberate. For the victim's family, the waiting was almost unbearable. They had already waited years for investigators to identify a suspect. Now they faced one final period of uncertainty. No one could predict how long the deliberations would last. Hours passed. The courthouse remained unusually quiet. Outside, reporters gathered, aware that the verdict would represent more than the resolution of a single criminal case. Across the country, investigators working other unsolved homicides were watching closely. A conviction would reinforce the growing role of investigative genetic genealogy in modern criminal investigations. Eventually, word spread through the courthouse. The jury had reached a decision. Family members, investigators, attorneys, and members of the public slowly returned to the courtroom. The atmosphere was tense. Every movement seemed deliberate. Every sound carried unusual weight. The defendant stood. The jurors entered. The courtroom fell silent. The foreperson handed the verdict form to the judge. After reviewing the document, the judge instructed the clerk to read the decision aloud. The jury found the defendant guilty. For a brief moment, there was complete silence. Then emotion filled the courtroom. Some members of the victim's family embraced one another through tears. Others simply sat quietly, absorbing words they had wondered if they would ever hear. Veteran investigators who had devoted years to the case reflected on the extraordinary path that had led to this moment. Some had inherited the investigation from detectives who had long since retired. Others had spent countless hours reviewing evidence that many believed would never produce an answer. The verdict belonged not only to the present investigation, but also to every person who had refused to let the case disappear into history. The defendant showed little visible emotion as the verdict was announced. Whatever thoughts crossed his mind remained known only to him. The judge later imposed a sentence reflecting the seriousness of the crime and the evidence presented during the trial. Although no sentence could restore the life that had been taken, the legal process had finally reached its conclusion. Outside the courthouse, prosecutors addressed the media. They emphasized that the case demonstrated the importance of preserving evidence, even when no immediate suspect could be identified. Advances in forensic science, they explained, continue to provide new opportunities to solve crimes once believed impossible to resolve. Investigators echoed that message. The smallest biological trace, the most carefully stored piece of evidence, the report filed decades earlier. Any one of those could become the key to solving a case years later. For the victim's loved ones, the verdict did not erase the loss. Birthdays missed. Family gatherings forever changed. Milestones the victim never had the opportunity to experience. Those realities could never be altered. But uncertainty had finally been replaced with truth. The person responsible had been identified, held accountable, and judged in a court of law. As the courtroom emptied and the media attention slowly faded, one question remained for investigators and forensic experts alike. If one case could be solved after so many years through advances in DNA technology, how many other forgotten files were still waiting for the same breakthrough? That question would shape the future of cold case investigations for years to come. The legacy of this case extended far beyond a single conviction. It became proof that even when justice is delayed for decades, determination, careful evidence preservation, and scientific progress can eventually bring the truth into the light. The courtroom had finally fallen silent. The trial was over. The verdict had been delivered. And after decades of uncertainty, a family finally had the answer they had spent years searching for. But the impact of the case did not end when the judge left the bench. Because this investigation represented something much larger than one crime, one suspect, or one conviction. It represented a transformation in the way the world looked at unsolved cases. For generations, investigators had faced the same painful reality. Some crimes were never solved, not because the truth did not exist, but because the tools needed to uncover it had not yet been invented. A fingerprint could be missed. A witness could forget. A suspect could disappear. And biological evidence, no matter how valuable, could remain nothing more than an unidentified sample stored in an evidence room. But science changed that. The DNA left behind at a crime scene became more than evidence. It became a message from past. A message that could wait decades before finally being understood. The case demonstrated the incredible power of investigative genetic genealogy, a method that combined modern DNA analysis with traditional family history research. It allowed investigators to explore connections that had previously been invisible. Instead of asking only, "Who is this person?" scientists began asking, "Who are this person's relatives? Where did this family come from? Which branch of this family tree could lead to the answer?" Those questions opened a new door in criminal investigations. Cold cases that had remained untouched for years suddenly had new possibilities. Evidence once considered too old could become valuable again. Files once placed into storage could be reopened. Families who had waited decades could finally receive answers. But the rise of genetic genealogy also created important conversations about privacy, ethics, and responsibility. The same technology that helped investigators solve serious crimes depended on genetic information, shared by individuals who were often researching their own ancestry. Many people who submitted DNA samples never imagined that their information could one day assist a criminal investigation. This created a complex balance. On one side was the need to bring justice to victims and hold offenders accountable. On the other was the importance of protecting personal privacy and ensuring that genetic information was handled responsibly. Law enforcement agencies, scientists, and policymakers continued debating how this powerful technology should be used. What rules should exist? Who should have access to genetic information? How can investigators solve crimes while respecting individual rights? These questions became part of a larger discussion about the future of forensic science. But for victims' families, the importance of the breakthrough was often much more personal. A cold case is not just a file number. It is a person, a son or daughter, a parent, a friend, someone whose absence continues to affect the lives of others long after the crime is forgotten by the public. Every unsolved case carries a family waiting for answers, a family wondering whether the person responsible will ever be found. A family asking whether their loved one's story will disappear with time. This case showed those families that time does not always win. The years may pass. The evidence may become old. The investigation may slow down. But the search for truth can continue. Investigators who work cold cases often describe their mission in simple terms. Never forget. Never give up. Never assume a case is impossible. Because history has shown that the smallest clue can become the most important one. A single strand of DNA. A forgotten document. A witness who finally comes forward. A technological breakthrough that changes everything. The investigation also changed the way police departments approached unsolved crimes. More agencies began reviewing old evidence, identifying cases where preserved DNA might hold answers, and exploring partnerships with forensic specialists. The message was clear. A case that appears unsolvable today may not remain unsolvable forever. Future detectives may have tools that do not yet exist. Future scientists may discover methods that seem impossible now. And evidence collected decades earlier may one day provide the key. The story of this case became a reminder that justice does not always move quickly. Sometimes it moves slowly. Sometimes it takes years. Sometimes it requires generations of investigators, scientists, and family members refusing to stop searching. But eventually, the truth has a way of finding its path. The DNA trail began as a silent piece of evidence hidden away from the world. It became a genetic map, then a family tree, then a suspect, and finally, a path to justice. The person responsible had spent years believing the past was behind him. But the past had never disappeared. It had been waiting in the evidence, waiting in the science, waiting for the moment when someone would finally know how to listen. And when that moment arrived, decades of silence were broken. The victim's story was remembered. The investigation was completed. And the world was reminded of one powerful truth. No matter how much time passes, justice can still find its way home. The conclusion of one investigation often becomes the beginning of another. For the detectives, forensic scientists, and families connected to this case, the verdict represented justice. A mystery that had survived for decades had finally been solved. A name had been attached to the evidence. A person responsible had been held accountable. But across the world, thousands of other cases remained open. Thousands of families were still waiting. Thousands of evidence boxes remained stored away, holding pieces of stories that had not yet been completed. The breakthrough in this case became a symbol of hope for those forgotten investigations. Because every cold case contains the same possibility. The answer may already exist. It may be hidden inside a piece of evidence collected years earlier. It may be waiting for the right technology, the right investigator, the right moment. For decades, investigators were limited by the tools available to them. A fingerprint that could not be matched remained only a fingerprint. A DNA sample without a database connection remained anonymous. A witness who could not remember crucial details could not provide the missing piece. But the evolution of forensic science changed the landscape. Modern investigators now approach old cases with a different mindset. They reopen files once considered exhausted. They re-examine evidence once considered insignificant. They use new technology to ask old questions. What was missed? What was overlooked? What information was impossible to discover years ago? The answers are often found in places no one expected. A genetic match from a distant relative. A digital record. A forgotten photograph. A document stored in an archive. A detail that seemed meaningless until viewed through the lens of modern science. For families of victims, these developments brought a new kind of hope. For years, many had heard the same painful words. There is nothing more we can do. But advances in technology changed that sentence. Now, investigators could say, let's look again. That simple change meant everything. The emotional impact of solving a cold case extended far beyond the courtroom. For many families, the hardest part was not only losing someone they loved, it was living without knowing what happened. Unanswered questions can become a permanent burden. Where did they go? Who was responsible? Why did this happen? Will anyone ever know the truth? A conviction cannot reverse tragedy, but answers can provide something that uncertainty never can. A beginning, a way forward, a chance to finally remember the victim not only through the crime, but through the life they lived. The investigators involved in these cases often understand that their work is about more than evidence and procedures. It is about people. Behind every file number is a family. Behind every photograph is a person who had dreams, relationships, and a future that was taken away. That understanding is what keeps many investigators working long after a case becomes difficult. Cold case investigations require extraordinary patience. There are no guarantees. A detective can spend months following a lead that goes nowhere. A scientist can analyze evidence that provides no answer. A family can wait years without knowing whether justice will ever arrive. Yet investigators continue, because history has shown that impossible does not always mean unsolvable. The success of investigative genetic genealogy also inspired a new generation of forensic professionals. Scientists, analysts, and researchers began studying how genetic information could be used responsibly to help identify unknown individuals and bring closure to unresolved cases. But they also recognized the importance of caution. Every breakthrough carries responsibility. Every new tool must be used carefully. Every investigation must balance the pursuit of justice with respect for privacy, accuracy, and fairness. The future of cold case solving would not depend only on technology. It would depend on the people using it. The detectives willing to reopen old files. The scientists willing to explore new methods. The families willing to keep searching. And the communities willing to remember victims whose stories deserve to be heard. Years after the crime occurred, the case had proven something remarkable. Time is powerful, but determination is stronger. Technology can reveal what was hidden. Science can uncover what was forgotten. And evidence can survive long after people believe a case has disappeared. The final pages of this investigation were not only about one solved crime. They were about a promise. A promise that no victim would be forgotten. A promise that no family would be abandoned. A promise that even when the trail goes cold, the search for truth continues. Because somewhere in an evidence room, an old file may still be waiting. Somewhere, a clue may still exist. Somewhere, a question that has remained unanswered for decades may already contain its own solution. And someday, when science catches up with the evidence, another silent witness may finally speak.